Vince Murphy is the Sustainable Programs Manager for the town of Nantucket. He's a former environmental consultant, has a Master's of Science in Ecosystem Conservation and Landscape Management from the University College Cork, Ireland, and is now a proud Irish American. He has lived in several parts of Europe and North America, including Ireland, the UK, Netherlands, Finland, and Arizona. Very foreign, before settling on Nantucket with his family. So Vince has worked as an environmental consultant in Ireland. He was most recently the Coastal Resilience Coordinator for the town of Nantucket and is now excitedly in his new role. And we're really looking forward to hearing what Vince has to say about how the salvage and reuse fits into the town's goals for sustainability. Come on up.
Now then, the standard volume check. Is that all right? Makes sense to everybody? Great. So I'm going to try and talk through some of the ideas of how salvage and material reuse and deconstruction and material reuse can fit into town policy and how we can develop that over time and how it works into our overall sustainability goals within the town, which we're in the middle of creating at the moment. So one of the things I keep saying is we need miracles. We need miracles for lots of things, everything from sustainable reuse of materials, through dredging, through energy, through historic preservation, you name it, we need it. I'm going to have to explain a bit more about miracles in a minute. It's probably my new favorite topic, but just let's explain a little bit about sustainability first. So there's three core aspects to sustainability: environmental parts, the economic parts, and the equity parts, sometimes called the social parts of sustainability. All three of those aspects have to work together in what I call the 3 E's for how we can have something function in a sustainable way. And this is when I keep talking about miracles. But I like it as an acronym rather than any other way of looking at it. I want to match our historic character, but also look to our future to make sure that we can have the equity we need to ensure we can have the preservation and understand our historic character and not lose a sense of ourselves. So this involves using what we already have around us. And this is where miracles is important. Making island resources a collaborative local effort for sustainability. It is one of my new little acronyms to try and make sure that we can see how we can include sustainable actions into everything we do. So I'm just going to look at a little way of how we can do that in relation to building materials and deconstruction and materials reuse, because this all feeds into maintaining our historic fabric. And I know I'm borrowing from some of the previous themes and some of the future themes that are going to be discussed here as well today. But the historic fabric, as Holly has explained to me, is what the character of our homes are. And we are just talking about our homes as far as this effort is concerned, and some other ancillary type buildings and other municipal buildings as well, potentially, which would be just wonderful. So we already talked about the environmental part of sustainability. And here's how you can include it by looking at the carbon savings, keeping embodied carbon within the property and within materials, reduce transportation emissions so we don't have to bring so many things here or move deconstructed or demolished materials off island. Reduce landfill emissions, because once we do put things into landfill, things decompose, we get carbon being broken down, methane being released, and that is net negative and bad for our environment and for our atmosphere, triggering more of the climate problems we're already starting to see. We reduce our disposal volume, which is clearly and obviously a good thing as we look forward to the future of where we have to close our town dump and how the construction and demolition building works and operates. And it reduces overall demolition waste. The next leg is the equity leg. I'm going to hit the same theme twice between this and the next one, but it is effectively cheaper materials for people to use to build homes. And when we already have an overly stretched housing market to some degree, if you can get lucky and get yourself a plot of land and try and build something on it and have cheaper materials, all the better for the person building the home. And this is where I bring back in retaining the historic fabric. Mary already said it, it's materials that might have come from one building and be in another, but it stays on island and keeps our character in place. And it might also be better to look towards industrial regulation. How do we regulate our building industry so that we can understand how this might work in a fair way for everyone. And again, from the economic side, from the people that are buying and selling materials, this reusing of building materials would lead to, again, cheaper materials. It could also lead to new skilled jobs, effectively create a new industry on island. And it would reduce dump fees. People would have to pay less to get into the dump by weight, because that's how it tends to work there. And it would reduce shipping costs for things that are shipped off island. And of course, it would lead to economic development by creating a whole new industry. So this is the house that sustainability built. But before we get onto that, I'm just going to look at different options of how this might all work. And the main one, and the best option in some respects, and one of my favorites, is move the whole house. Move it to a different site, and you get to maximize your carbon savings and move along. And this is the best option in some ways. And there's already a town bylaw that covers this. It's the demolition delay bylaw. And you get 60 days to try and find somebody to take the house and move it off-site before a building is demolished. It wouldn't be lovely to see that term of time increased. And there's an existing program that Nantucket Housing Trust and Annie Kutzba and her organisation run, where they have people waiting in the wings to take these homes if there's a suitable matchup between a person who's ready to take a home, has a site they can move it to, and can get a company in place to move that building. This is all done, of course, through HDC approvals. And I encourage people to sign up for it if they can't. I'm looking into it. But we also have to look at how this fits in. One of our existing activities of moving homes, as Holly says, we've been doing it for centuries here in Nantucket. And it does hit all of the sustainability goals. It fulfills the equity because it makes a cheaper building available for somebody to reuse. It obviously has the carbon savings, making it an environmentally friendly way of doing it. And because it's cheaper. Sound died. Oh, we're back. Thank you. He's right there. Thank you very kindly. So fulfilling the economic part of it. And as has been said many times before, and will be said many times here again today, this is a Nantucket tradition. It is part of our local ethos. And if it doesn't work, the HDC are okay with it, then sadly we have to go down the demolition route, which, as we've already heard from Mary, we have to know when to say thank you and goodbye to the house, to quote Mary Kondo. Sorry. So when we look at deconstruction, we have kind of two key options as I can see it at the moment. And this is all just looking at it from the kind of forward-looking way. How could we do this, and trying to see, well, what policies could we put in place? What infrastructure could we put in place? And the way that I see this working is that we could have a town facility, and this has been widely discussed and people are quite interested in this idea. Or we could do it separately like other communities and have a bylaw in place. So what I'd like to do now is go through how we might have a town facility, how that might function, how it could work, and then how a bylaw might work by comparison. And they're two very different tracks. So to explore the town facility first, we're going to have to find a place for deconstruction materials to go. And there was a great report done recently. I think it was about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. I'm going to misquote it now. Please, somebody correct me. EBC. Thank you. And they developed this wonderful plan for possible locations where such a building might go. But when we look at it, the building would probably, and in the report they have similar numbers, be something in the region of about 15 to 20,000 square feet. It'd be a big facility. But we have to understand what that means, just try and visualize it. I kind of went around and had a look at a few things and tried to cruise on the town website and look for similar sized buildings or big buildings so people get an actual idea of what 15 to 20,000 square feet would be. When you go to the dump on a Saturday or Sunday morning and you go up to the recycling facility and there's all those doors where you put down your plastic and your tin and your cardboard and such, that whole building itself that goes back quite a distance and is, what would you say, maybe 35, 40 yards from east to west, that by itself is a 20,000 square foot building. And that's big enough to take large scale machinery and out of. But the ground plan, the footprint is 20,000 square feet. The Dreamland, right here in the downtown area, just the footprint on the ground, not upstairs or anything, that's about a 10,000 square foot building. Right here, our Whaling Museum, the footprint of this building is about 15,000 square feet. So we'd need something at least the size of this building potentially. But if you want to get seriously ambitious and have such a massive centre that we can take the extreme volume of property we have on this island over time, just look at Stop and Shop. The big one, Mid-Island, about 38,000 square feet. So maybe somewhere between something the size of the Dreamland and Stop and Shop is what we need to have a facility to be able to have deconstructed materials stored and processed. But it's not just that. You also have to have the access roads, the parking, and a loading and unloading area. You have to bring all of those into mind. You also have to look at the materials you're dealing with. We're going to have windows that have lead paint on them and door frames and that kind of thing. And don't forget, kids think lead paint tastes sweet. It's a known hazard that you just have to be careful of. So we have to remove those hazards from any materials we want to reuse. Discuss that. And then there's other materials like asbestos that we have to look at how do we deal with those in a safe and effective way so people don't end up with mesothelioma. So then the next question is, who would undertake the deconstruction? Would it be town staff, contractors and builders, or something else? If it were contractors and builders to help get an industry going, one idea is to have a set of tax incentives. Talk about more of that in a second. And who will staff the facility? Would it be town employees? Would it be private contractors, or how would that work? And what would the annual running costs be? Do you have to sell the items in order to fund and recoup the money that goes into it? What would their salaries be, and how would you fund that through sales? Would they be town staff on pension funds, or would they be private employees? There's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and some unknowns, but just stuff to start thinking about. If we did have such a town facility, how would it operate, and who would be best to run it? And then some materials won't go straight away, and they might end up ultimately not being of use and never being taken by anyone. Then the best obvious point would be to take it to the construction demolition building at the dump, so you still have to dump it anyway. You're not going to be able to reuse everything that's brought to such a facility. And would extra taxes have to fund it? And there's a big question in that one alone. Then there's the concept too, when I was chatting about bylaws, and this is something that's been done in other jurisdictions, municipalities, not necessarily in Massachusetts, but we've got examples from Texas that we've been looking at quite closely. But this would have to involve the creation and the writing of a new bylaw for the town. And that alone takes time, and that could take years to get right. It would probably also have to have a set of guidelines in order to understand what materials you reuse, how they're reused, how they're processed, how they're handled, and what their value might be. But the best thing I could think is, if it was a bylaw, to get industry to set this up, we offer a set of tax incentives in order to allow, say, construction companies, newly developed deconstruction companies, to come in, have a tax break for a significant amount of time so they can get their companies set up and understand where things are going. This is how the guidelines might work. This is kind of where I'm looking at next for the guidelines. And the biggest thing we'll have to understand is the market will determine the material demand, and the guidelines will have to accommodate them. It doesn't matter if it's free or if it's for sale or at a very low cost. The market will still say what comes out of these kinds of facilities, whether it's town or from building groups. The primary thing that I think would be easiest to move through would be copper and other similar recyclables. Doors, door frames, windows, fireplaces, all of the things that are historic fabric and easily recognizable interior features. And also bathroom sets and kitchen sets have reuse. Marble is the kind of thing that doesn't go off or out of style. Unique features in buildings can also be saved. And that's something else that we could try and find a nice part of a centre for storing these things in. Secondary interest might be things like lumber. Once you start to pull the house apart and get the old growth lumber, the very fine grained stuff you can see on the bottom picture, there's two pieces of lumber, the old fine grained stuff and the new, younger secondary growth with much wider grain span. which has very different properties and very different uses. Pressure-treated lumber could also be stored in a separate area or reused in different ways. Flooring materials, particularly hardwood flooring and laminate flooring, that can be taken up relatively easily sometimes. But then there are difficult materials that when you're trying to deconstruct a house and take stuff out that you're not going to be able to take out easily with a lot of specialized ability or really well-trained people. I have never successfully removed drywall or tiles without breaking all of them, sad to say. Roofing materials, by the very nature that you've already put a nail through it once, it's hard to imagine that being reused. And insulation, fiberglass insulation for the sake of argument, there are other types too, of course, but they're hard to recover. They've already had a life in a building. They might not necessarily have the same properties as the day they went in. So you have to consider, well, what do we take, what can't we take? There are also other materials that are difficult, particularly white goods. This is something of a problem for the town. It'd be simpler for a private organisation or building groups to be able to undertake this. The biggest problem with a lot of the white goods is that they might have, say, a refrigerator might have chemicals in it, CFCs and other refrigerants, which then, if not properly handled, can actually contribute to our greenhouse gas situation. We also don't know if the machine would have a warranty. We would have to give it away in as-is condition, and if heaven forbid there was ever an issue with it, there would be potential for recourse for somebody to sue the town for a faulty machine. And that would bring in unnecessary legal challenges. There might also be recalls on machines, so we need to understand this. It's an unnecessary risk for the town to take. So, all right. We've been through all this now. We understand that there's potential for a facility and a bylaw to create, to have private industry effectively create these on their own sites and on their own terms and understand what materials are useful to them. But the conclusion is there is no real result. We're still investigating possibilities. This is quite early in the discussion. I'd like to advance this, and I'd like to seek feedback from everyone, please. If you have anything, please email me, talk to me, find me. My office is at 131 Pleasant Street in the old fire station. You go to Stop and Shop, you come to me before or after. We can all have a nice chat about it and think, well, what do people want to see? How does this want to function? Is a bylaw better? Do you prefer to see a big facility? Who will run it? How will we work it? And with all of that, I would actually like to ask everyone to act sustainably and say thank you and see if there's any questions before. Do we have time for questions? Thank you kindly, everyone. Any questions? Or is everyone just eager for a break? Yes, sir.
So you have to contend with some energy codes when we're moving houses these days. For example, if you wanted to move a house and renovate it more than 50%, you're not going to be able to reuse old windows and stuff like that. Have you started to consider how to work around the HERS codes for energy?
We're going to start looking into that, and I'm sure myself and the energy coordinator, Lauren Sinatra, we can put our heads together, start looking at how that would work together. Like I was trying to say, we're at the kind of early concept stage, trying to understand it. I'm more or less trying to see the building side of it first, but you're exactly right. There will be energy codes and there'll be building codes and wind hurricane codes that we're going to have to contend with, among other things. Correct.
As the preservation planner in the room, I have to say that we have many structures on this island that are contributing, therefore can actually be exempt from the substantial compliance section of the building code. Therefore, we can still move structures, hopefully without not having to comply with a lot of these building codes that are being forced down and be sustainable in that regard.
Thanks, Holly.
I'll just add to that. I'll be speaking next around embodied carbon, and it won't be in the near future. We'll be able to quantify carbon in buildings, not just from an operational standpoint, but from a material standpoint, and then look at the entire map of the building. So there'll be substantial accommodations for materials as well as operation, hopefully in the near future by 2030.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi.
Is that it? Yep.
I have a question here. So this is great and absolutely well needed. It's kind of needed almost immediately at this point when you see the volume that goes into the landfill, i.e., and also the example of the demoed house on Sherburne just recently. And you know, there are I was curious why you started with such a large facility. I had run all the numbers on this, and actually a smaller facility to start could be accommodate the bulk of what's going on into landfill, and then the net return on that in deconstruction is really equivalent to almost $1.6 million in the resale based on like $100 a ton of material that's demolished and brought in for resale. I just think personally, I think this needs to happen on a much more timely basis. This can't go on for years. It's been years already, and I'm happy to share the information I have about this.
Wonderful. Thank you.
In reference to timely basis, there was a Facebook group started over a year ago called Nantucket Architectural Salvage. There's about 860 members. There certainly could be a whole lot more, and we could roll something out so people know about it. But it's been somewhat effective as on a very small scale, but people who have things post, doors, windows, material. And so in the interim, before the building happens or before other things, people are trying to do things.
Oh, 100% agree. And it would be, I suppose the easiest way of saying it is this, it would be a formalization of exactly what we've been doing on Nantucket for generations, and even in very organized way on social media of late. It is very much the same principle. It's just organizing it a different way into a more grand scale so we lose less. Yes, sir.
You spoke about a facility and then recycling. So the rumor is the DPW will be moving at some point sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe some of the facilities at the DPW site on Manicat Road could be the facility.
It's certainly a possibility. And there's been discussions at Select Board about the DPW shifting location to a mid-island point. And then that site would have to go through redevelopment, and then would be a potential reuse for a number of different things, including material salvage and reuse. I've also heard it touted for about a half dozen other ideas too, but it's certainly on the list that I've heard. Well, thank you very kindly, everybody. Greatly appreciated.